Hello everybody, this is Founder Layroon and I'm here with Fantasy Grounds College. I'm going to do a quick tip here for all of you people who are new or perhaps you just recently updated to Fantasy Grounds Unity. It's very similar to Classic, although there's a few different differences, so hopefully this will help you with some of the more vague or mysterious aspects of Fantasy Grounds. So this is stuff that's more related to things outside of Fantasy Grounds. So I'm assuming that you have a license or that you may have one of the rule sets, whatever it may be. I'm going to show you how this is set up for Fantasy Grounds Unity. So first things first, I'm going to go to the main screen. And this is basically your launch screen. If you want to get inside or under the hood of Fantasy Grounds, you want to go up to the top left corner. And it's up here so that if you didn't know, that's where the directory is. So I'm going to click on that folder, and that will open up the back end of Fantasy Grounds. Now I am in the back end of Fantasy Grounds. So if you ever hit like a print screen, if you're in the middle of a game, it will save all of your preview print screenshots here in this folder. This is the master folder. You have a cache folder, which I imagine you'd want to leave that alone unless you're instructed to change things. You have a campaigns folder. This is where all your sessions and your games are stored. I made this extra folder. This is not normally included, but this is characters, so I store all my characters in there. There's a docs folder. I don't mess around with that. Extensions folder. So if you download any extensions, they go in this folder. Now, there are extensions that are part of Fantasy Grounds that are actually official. So like the 50 Fathoms extension, that's actually a rule set extension. But the third-party ones that you buy or you download or create, they should go in this folder. And when you actually go to load up your rule set or your session, you have to load those in first. The images folder. So the images folder is basically, it is what it is. That's where you store your images on the top level. So what we're looking at right now is the actual top level or the hierarchy that's above all the other folders. So if you put stuff in images, modules, portraits, or tokens, those will be available to all of your campaigns, at least within the rule set. So if you store your images, your maps, your handouts, and modules and such in these folders, you are going to be able to access those from pretty much any rule set. However, there are some rule set specific things, but those come within the actual official content that goes into your vault. The vault folder is where all of your official content gets downloaded to. The vault folder are basically a collection of encrypted DAT files. Those are what are actually downloaded from the store when you buy things from Fantasy Grounds College, or excuse me, from Fantasy Grounds, the store. So basically, when you download stuff, it goes into this folder. Now, occasionally you'll have to delete a DAT file and re-download it if it gets corrupted. But for the most part, leave that stuff alone. In my images folder, I've made some subfolders to help me organize my assets. So I have random assets, spell tokens, one of my favorite cartographers, Tom Cardos. I have some oceanic maps, and I also have some Arctic stuff. So all of this stuff will be available in my actual game or in my actual sessions. They'll all always be accessible from within my rule set. Okay, your modules folder is where if you buy anything from the DM's Guild or if you create your own content, it will be available in that folder. That's where you should put those mod files. When you put a mod file in here, don't expect to load it right away in Fantasy Grounds. If you have Fantasy Grounds up and running, you need to go back down to the launcher and then reload. You cannot normally reload or put in a module and just load it. Fantasy Grounds has to actually scan it and look at it before it'll be available for you to load within the Fantasy Grounds within the interface. So if you try to load a module that you just stuck in the back end of the file, you can't do it while you're in a session. You have to actually go back down to the bottom or to the start screen and then reboot. You can't normally do it within Fantasy Grounds. Now there is a reload command. I'm not sure if it'll reparse all the modules, but there is that. But that is more saved for Fantasy Ground edits. I don't know if it will actually go back and pick up the modules that you've added. So just a little side note on that. If you have portraits, they go in the portraits folder. It's pretty self-explanatory. Here there are these PPK files, which are portrait packs. They're kind of an older format, but basically you can take a collection of these pictures and images and create a pack out of it, and then you would zip it and then rename it as a PPK file. And you can rename them and unzip it and see what they contain, but for the most part, they're just like a module. You can rename them to a zip file and unlock it and see what's in there. I have another folder called Custom Made Portraits. Instead of being in a pack, these are loose, so we'd use these as we need them. These are sized at 100 by 100, or you can go with maybe 125 by 125. You don't want a huge image when you are using for a portrait. There's a little tiny little box that it displays in. So there's no point in having a huge file. That just takes up memory for no reason. So resize your thumbnails to where they're about, I wouldn't say any bigger than 200 by 200. I realize that some of us are hard at seeing, so you can make them a little bigger, but you don't want some big 800 by 600 photo for these. And then, of course, tokens. So the best practice on tokens is to put them in folders and organize them. They are usually going to take up a lot of room. So also memory issues could happen if you have too many loaded at once. So be sparing with tokens. Make sure they're organized, have them in folders. But by having them in the top level or the data level of Fantasy Grounds, they're available in pretty much most of the rule sets. And that's pretty much all you would really want to mess with. Everything else I would just leave as is. Now I'm going to go to the campaign folder. And this is where you have all your specific campaigns. Now, when you want to add something to a given rule set or a given session, you will also have unique folders for that session. So you have tokens, portraits, images also. So if you put those in here or in this level, you only can access them from the campaign. You won't be able to access them from the other campaign folders. So you have to decide, which is proprietary to just this game and which is needed for all the rule sets. So each one of these folders has the same type of folders as the data folder. So if you come back in here and you look at these folders, these are the top level of Fantasy Grounds. And if you go into campaigns, and then you go into the directory there, you also have images, portraits, and so on and so forth. So just be careful. If you load a whole bunch of assets into one particular session, you'll only have access to it there. If you load it on the top end, which is in the SmiteWorks Fantasy Grounds folder, you'll have access to it from any rules or any session, I should say. So, like I said, some assets are rule set specific, but in this case, if you add anything, such as images, they should be available to any or all of your different games and such. So it really depends on where you stick the images at. And like I said, again, there's some screenshots. So here's a screenshot of something I must have been working on at one point. So if you want to take a screenshot of your game, just hit the print screen and it will save to the master directory or the main upper level of the Fantasy Grounds folder. In most cases, I don't know about Macs, but it's in your username, app data, roaming, SmiteWorks, Fantasy Grounds. If you're using Steam, it might be a little different, but just make sure that you don't get those confused. Also, do not put the same folders for Fantasy Grounds Classic mixed in with Fantasy Grounds Unity. Keep those separate. Early on, there was a lot of confusion and heartache over that because people were installing into the same directory. You want to keep Unity and Fantasy Grounds Classic separate. They are different programs. You can move over your campaigns, just move over your campaign folder and any assets that you might deal with. But for all purposes and sakes and such, the only thing you need to move over is the actual campaign folder. Moving over all these settings and stuff is just going to give you grief. So make sure that when you move your campaign from Classic to Fantasy Grounds Unity, all you need is the campaign folder, and you just copy and paste it into the campaign folder in the Unity directory. There may be a few weird anomalies because sometimes the text is a little different, but it should work for the most part. Now, do not go backwards, so don't take a newer campaign from Unity and try to put it in Classic. You can put the artwork and such in there, but you cannot put the data, or it's going to it's not going to work right. So you can go from you can go from Classic to Unity, but you cannot go from Unity to Classic. It's not possible. So that is basically where all your stuff goes when you download or when you need to include some new content. So I'm going to add some stuff to my actual Fantasy Grounds. So I got some modules off the DMs Guild. So here I have a bunch of different things that I have purchased off the DMs Guild. So I'm just going to copy and paste these into that folder that's basically scanning through right now. So I basically just cut and paste everything from the downloads folder into my Fantasy Grounds modules folder for Unity. And now when I load up Fantasy Grounds, I should be able to access those modules if I go into the library and actually load the content. So I'm going to go ahead and load Fantasy Grounds for a minute. So while I'm doing that, if there's any questions, please ask. I want you to be comfortable with the interface, and I also want to help you learn how to use it. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. Mainly, I'm dealing with the assets and the directories and the folders. Again, I'm saying that you have your main data level, and then you have the actual campaign level for different assets, and if you want them to show up in all of your campaigns, you have to put them on the data level. If they're only exclusive to a certain game, then you're going to put them in your campaign folder under the same folders, such as portraits and tokens and images. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're actually using Fantasy Grounds. While I load this up, I'll give you one other hint. If you have too much content, it takes Fantasy Grounds a little while to load it. So if you don't like the extensive load times, clean up your library a little bit and organize it, and it goes a long ways. It really helps. I myself have a huge rat's nest of a mess, so I'm just letting you know from experience that I have a bunch of content in there that probably could be sorted out. So now that I'm in Fantasy Grounds, I am going to go over to the library and start checking out the stuff that I have downloaded. So you come down here to the bottom right, click on Library. In the library view, I'm going to click on Modules. So in the library view, I clicked on Modules. I'm going to go with this Data Module Activation. And from here, you can kind of look through to see what all that you've downloaded with the titles. And you can also filter as to what stuff you have loaded. Another thing to note is that it'll only show so many views per page, so like 10. So you'll have to use the page to go to the next page. So that's basically how you would come through here. And then if you see the modules that you have recently purchased or something you made, then you can just click the load button and that'll load up the module. So hopefully that helps you with Fantasy Grounds. That's how you activate your books or any content that you've prepared. Now, images, if you added any images, these will be in your asset folder. So for tokens, I only have a data folder, which means that I don't have any specific campaign folder. However, in the images and maps area, I do have a campaign folder. So that means the images that are in there are just specific to this campaign. So if I open it up, there are my images. If I double click, that's a preview. And I can create an image record, or I can set this as a background decal. So there's my decal if I wanted that. So basically, this is how you access your content. You load it in the back end in the proper directories. You come to the library or the assets, depending on what it is. So if you load a module, you go to library. If you load an asset, which could be a map, a token, whatever, it is accessible in the assets folder. If you have a module that already has that stuff in there, it will be in the image record, which is up on this upper right here and under the images. And then whatever module you have loaded, you use the drop down and select whatever module that you have. So that's just a quick and dirty lesson. Hopefully that helps you guys. If you have any questions about that, please ask, or if you have time, go to the Fantasy Grounds College. We'll teach you how to use the software. It's free. We do this on a voluntary basis. So if you're not already part of the college, join us. The links will be in the chat. You can find us anywhere online. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're all over the place. So if you need to find us, that's where you'll find us. Normally, we run Game Master classes, character creation. Occasionally, we'll have combat classes. Semi-related to the file locations. Classic had the little nuke button. Yeah, I don't think that's a thing anymore. I think the cache thing, there's a cache folder. I don't know if you're supposed to delete that manually or not. I think it would be okay. Yeah, the nuke button is gone. It's not there. There is a setting. Matter of fact, I'll drop out and I'll show you. The correct way to exit Fantasy Grounds is to right-click and then click on the Return to Launcher. So in Settings, when you go to this Troubleshoot area, this is where you can clear your vault, you can clear your settings, you can force the app to update and gather logs. So the clear vault probably deletes the modules out of your vault. Clear settings probably wipes out all your settings. Of course, I don't want to do that. But that's one way to access your some of your settings, but I don't think that clears the actual cache folder. Normally, what you should do for troubleshooting, if you have any join game issues, is first of all, you want to take and have the person disconnect from your table or actually restart Fantasy Grounds and then try to connect. Occasionally, your icon, the one that to rejoin your session, let me show you what I'm talking about. So when you click on Join Game, if you look in the history up here where these red dots are, these are previous sessions that I've been part of. Once in a while, these get corrupted, or there may be an update that's got the mismatch. So if someone double clicks on that and tries to connect, that information may not be updated. So I would honestly have them just join and not use the history and re-find your session. So that's another thing that people don't realize, is that sometimes if the server updates or if Fantasy Grounds updates and the versions are very different, that history might become corrupt, or it may become outdated. I don't know what information it stores other than a password and your address, so it's hard to say. I could be wrong, but I think that may cause a problem in some cases. But as far as the cache folder goes, they shouldn't have to delete it unless it got corrupted somehow. But I've never really messed with it. I think I've seen people empty it out. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's going to kill anything. It just might take longer for your player to connect and re-download all of the assets that you have shared. One thing you do want to do to help mitigate that and keep that lower is don't share too many large objects like big maps and 50,000 tokens and such like that. That's what causes most of the issues. And also people using wireless, that's probably the worst offender right there. Wireless doesn't guarantee a steady connection. And unlike an MMO, which has a redundant path where it just keeps trying to connect, even if you have lag and such, Fantasy Grounds doesn't really have that. So once you drop packets a few times, it just becomes difficult for your player to stay connected, and then it just crashes out on them. So if you're the host, definitely try to plug in. If you're a player using wireless, do so at your own peril. It's not a faux pas or anything, but if you don't have a good connection, or if a lot of people in your house are using your bandwidth, or whatever the reason might be, it is one of those things you want to avoid if you can. I'm not saying don't use wireless. I'm saying that I advise against it because it just adds another layer of problems. Generally, there's not enough bandwidth is usually what ends up happening. And if you shove a bunch of things into a little needle hole, you're not going to get much out on the other end. So just be careful for that. So anyhow, anything else, and I will call it a day. I've rambled on for about 20 minutes or so or more. I just put this video out real quick to help all of you guys get more familiar with Fantasy Grounds. And just remember that you have a top level directory and then you have a campaign level directory for your assets. So you have to decide where you're going to put those. Make sure that your images, maps, and tokens are sized appropriately. So there are some standards, some suggested sizes. If you want to know what those are, on the fantasygroundscollege.net website, we have a knowledge base, and just look up suggested sizes or look up images, and there'll be an article that we publish that has the recommended image sizes, because a lot of times people go wrong. They have a huge map, and that's kind of a no-no for Fantasy Grounds. Even with Unity, it's really not about so much the host or the players. It's the bandwidth and the actual amount of space they have to work with when it comes to connectivity. So a lot of people don't realize that, but that's one of the issues. So anyways, I will get going. Thanks, everybody. I will have this archived on our social media. outlets. So there'll be a thing on YouTube, there'll be something in Facebook probably, and also later on as a rerun in Twitch. So you have a good afternoon or evening, and I will see you around.